So you've probably heard the name Sitting Bull, but his Lakota name was Tatanka Iyotanka. And his story, wow, it's one of the most powerful and honestly, one of the most misunderstood stories in all of American history.
But who was he really? I mean, was he just this fierce warrior that you see in all the old pictures? A holy man? A visionary? Or was he something way more complex? To really get to the heart of who this man was, we have to push past all those simple stereotypes. Because you see, his life wasn't just his story. It was really the story of an entire nation. His life became a mirror, reflecting the struggle, the spirit, and yeah, the tragedy of the Lakota people and their fight to just hold on to their world against absolutely overwhelming odds.
Okay, so to really understand the leader he eventually became, we gotta go way back, right back to the beginning. Our story doesn't start on some battlefield. No, it starts in his childhood. That's where the core of his character was really forged. And what's super interesting is that as a kid, his nickname was Hunkeshni. It means slow. But now, this wasn't because he was lazy or anything like that. It's because he was so deliberate. He would watch everything, listen, and really try to understand a situation before he'd jump in and act. And that right there, that trait, would come to define his leadership for his entire life. See, he was raised to live and breathe these four core Lakota virtues. It's like to be a true leader, you had to prove yourself in all four of these areas. You had to have bravery in a fight, fortitude when things got tough, generosity to your own people, and of course, wisdom, which, as we just saw, he was already showing as a boy. And then, at just 14 years old, get this, during a raid on a rival Crow's camp, he rides way out ahead of everyone and counts coup on a warrior. I mean, that's an act of just incredible bravery for a teenager. His father was so proud he threw this huge feast and gave his son his own name, Tatanka Iyotanka. That name translates to Buffalo Bull who sits down, and it's all about symbolizing a kind of immovable, unshakable strength. And believe me, that immovable strength was about to be tested in a huge way. As the US government started pushing deeper and deeper into Lakota lands, it basically forced a choice on the people. And it was a choice that would literally tear them apart and set Sitting Bull on a path of lifelong resistance. So you have the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868, and it just creates this massive split. On one side, you've got leaders like Red Cloud, who chose what they probably saw as the only way to survive, accept life on the reservation. But Sitting Bull, no way. He refused. He saw the treaty for what it was, a lie, and he led his followers away, totally determined to keep living freely. And his camp, out there in that so-called unceded territory, it quickly became the heart, the absolute center of the resistance. And it wasn't just his own Hunkpapa people. We're talking thousands of Lakota, Cheyenne, and others who just completely rejected reservation life. They all flocked to him. He was becoming more than just a chief. He was becoming a symbol. All right, so fast forward to 1876. By this point, the US government has pretty much lost all its patience. They officially declare all of these non-treaty bands hostile and send in the army with one goal: force them onto the reservations. This, right here, sets the stage for one of the most legendary confrontations in American history. So right before this massive battle that everyone knows is coming, Sitting Bull, acting as the holy man he was, performs this sun dance. And this is an incredibly grueling ritual. As a huge personal sacrifice, he offers up 100 small pieces of flesh from his own arms and dances until he just collapses into a trance. And while he's in that trance, he has this incredibly powerful vision. He sees soldiers falling from the sky, totally upside down, right into the Lakota camp. Then a voice tells him, "I give these to you because they have no ears." What a message, right? It was crystal clear. The soldiers weren't going to listen to reason, and so they would be delivered to the Lakota for destruction. You can just imagine, this vision absolutely electrified the warriors. And just days later, that vision came true. At the battle the Lakota called Greasy Grass, you probably know it as the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Lieutenant Colonel Custer makes this unbelievably foolish decision to attack the massive village. And, well, his entire command was wiped out. Now, it was warrior chiefs like Crazy Horse and Gall who led the actual charge, but you have to remember, it was Sitting Bull's spiritual guidance that had unified everyone and his vision that had promised them victory. But that victory, it was short-lived. The United States responded with just overwhelming force, and the Lakota world, the worlds they had fought so hard to protect, it really began to collapse. The thing is, The US Army knew it couldn't really beat the Lakota in a straight-up fight. So they changed tactics completely. They unleashed this, well, it was a brutal campaign of what you might call environmental warfare. They encouraged the so-called buffalo harvest to systematically wipe out the bison herds, the main food source, the lifeblood of the Plains tribes. The goal was simple and horrifying: starve them into submission. So Sitting Bull leads his people north, across the border into Canada, what they called the grandmother's land, hoping to find refuge. But the buffalo were gone there too, and the Canadian government offered no help. His people were literally starving. So after 4 long years, left with absolutely no other choice, he had to lead them back to the United States and surrender. And when he finally did surrender at Fort Buford, he made this incredible gesture. He didn't hand his rifle to an officer. No, he handed it to his own young son to give to them. And then he spoke the words that would cement his legacy forever as the last defiant symbol of the free Lakota nation. But even though his days as a warrior were over, his resistance, that was far from over. It just moved to a whole new battlefield, the court of American public opinion. Okay, check this out. In 1883, he gets invited to give a speech for a big ceremony celebrating the new railroad. They hand him this tame, pre-written speech to read, but instead he stands up, speaks in his own language, Lakota, and delivers this absolutely blistering critique. He says, and I'm quoting here, "I hate all white people, you are thieves and liars." And here's the kicker, the part that just perfectly illustrates the massive cultural gap. The audience, we're talking dignitaries, investors, the whole shebang, they couldn't understand a single word of Lakota. They just heard the passion in his voice and assumed he was giving this grand, welcoming speech. So they gave him a standing ovation. Can you believe that? Just an absolutely incredible moment of quiet, subversive resistance. He even did a stint touring for a season with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. And while he was often mocked and jeered by the crowds, the tour actually led to one of his most famous and surprising friendships. He was just so impressed by the sharpshooter Annie Oakley that he symbolically adopted her as his daughter. He even gave her the Lakota name Little Sure-Shot. But back on the reservation, things were getting tense again. A new spiritual movement called the Ghost Dance was spreading, giving a spark of hope to the desperate Lakota people. But for the government, well, it gave them the perfect excuse to silence their most famous and defiant chief, once and for all. So in 1890, the authorities were afraid of his influence on this growing ghost dance movement. They sent Indian Agency police to arrest him. A fight broke out, and Sitting Bull was shot and killed. But his story? It didn't end there, not by a long shot. The struggle over his legacy, even his physical remains, continued for decades. We're talking about everything from a neglected grave to a daring nighttime heist by his own family in 1953 to move his body. And that fight for his legacy is still going on. Just recently, in 2021, DNA taken from a lock of his hair finally, scientifically, confirmed the identity of his living great-grandson. When you boil it all down, Sitting Bull's entire life was a fight for his people's sovereignty, their right to exist as a nation, their right to control their own land, their own culture, and their own future. And that really leaves us with a pretty critical question, one that's just as relevant now as it was then. What does that fight for sovereignty look like today?